I'm a 26-year-old woman, and this story begins 16 years ago, when I was 10 and standing by my mother's grave. Everything felt cold, too quiet for a funeral, too quick to be real. I remember holding onto the sleeves of my dress and waiting for someone to tell me what to do. My father didn't want me to sit in the front row. He said it was for the adults, so I sat alone in the back, watching strangers cry harder than I did. When we got to the cemetery, I finally broke down. I was standing near the headstone, crying so hard I could barely breathe. A woman I didn't recognize came up behind me. She put her hand on my shoulder and leaned in close. "Don't cry," she whispered. "It makes people uncomfortable." I didn't answer. I just stared at the dirt. That was Lisa, my father's friend. I hadn't seen her before, but she acted like she belonged there. 3 months later, they were married. No big wedding. No announcement. One morning I woke up and she was in the kitchen making pancakes like she had always lived there. The bedroom my mother used to sleep in with my dad now had Lisa's clothes in the closet. The scent of my mother's perfume was gone. The picture of her on the hallway table was missing. I found it later in a plastic storage bin in the garage, underneath piles of books and half-used cleaning products. The bin next to it had my mother's wedding dress, stuffed into a black garbage bag. When I asked my dad why, he just said Lisa didn't want shrines to the past in the house. He made me delete every photo of my mom from the living room walls. He said it was time to move on. Lisa didn't waste time pretending. She introduced herself at my school as my mother. I found out when a teacher asked me if I was okay with my mom attending the parent conference. I said she wasn't my mother. The teacher looked confused. That same week, I came home to find Lisa wearing my mother's necklace. It had a gold locket with a tiny picture of me as a baby. Okay. She wore it like it belonged to her. I stopped speaking to her except when I had to. When she told me to call her mom, I refused. She said I was being difficult and that I needed to grow up. She called it adjustment issues. I called it pretending. The first Mother's Day after everything, Lisa threw a lunch party. She invited her own mother, set up the dining room, played music. I was the only one in the house not celebrating. I stayed in my room. When she came to get me, I said I didn't want to be part of it. She told me to stop moping around and said her mother deserved to be celebrated even if mine didn't. By then, I had started writing in journals. Every night after school, I would take 20 minutes to just write down everything. The things Lisa said, the changes in the house, what I remembered about my mom. No one knew about the journals. I kept them in a box under my bed. One day in 7th grade, I refused to go home. I sat outside the school gate and waited until the building closed. The principal called my father, who was furious. I ended up sitting with the school counselor for an hour. She was the first adult who didn't brush things off. I saw her once a week after that. Lisa wasn't happy. She said I was painting her as some kind of monster. She started checking my bedroom when I wasn't home. I moved the journals to my locker. By the time I turned 16, Lisa had gone from cold to controlling. She didn't like it when I missed family dinners, didn't answer her calls, or locked my door. On her birthday, I didn't show up to the restaurant. I had told my dad I had a project and couldn't come. When I got home that night, Lisa was waiting. She slapped me across the face before I could take my shoes off. I left the next morning. My aunt, my mom's sister, had offered me a room years ago. I finally said yes. I packed 2 duffel bags and never looked back. My father didn't call, not even once. Lisa told the rest of the family I had emotional problems, that I was acting out for attention. Some believed her, some didn't, but no one came to check. I stayed with my aunt through the rest of high school and into college. She gave me the kind of space that felt safe. She never asked too many questions, just made sure I had what I needed. When I turned 18, she handed me a small box. It had a necklace in it, the twin to the one my mom used to wear. My mom had given it to her years ago, just in case. That necklace is still with me. I wear it on the hard days. This story isn't about grief. Not anymore. It's about everything that came after. It's about the life I built on the ashes Lisa thought she could sweep away. It's about why she cries now every time someone says my name. Not because I broke her heart, but because she finally knows what it's like to be invisible. 2 months ago, I got engaged to Joshua. He's steady in a way that calms rooms, kind with his actions, not just his words. He met my aunt before he met me. She was his college professor, and she introduced us during a holiday dinner. We've been together for 3 years, and we're planning a fall wedding. Small guest list, outdoor venue, no chaos. From the very beginning, I didn't plan to invite my father or Lisa. I made that decision without hesitation. But when I told my aunt, she asked if I was sure. She said weddings bring up emotions, and maybe this was a chance for closure. I told her I'd think about it, even though I already knew the answer. Instead of sending them invitations, I mailed them a simple wedding card. Just a card with the date and location printed on it. No RSVP request, no formal invite. It was information, not an invitation. A week later, I got a call from an unknown number. I didn't answer. Then a message came through. It said, "You're still ungrateful. We'll be attending." I hadn't spoken to either of them in years. They weren't part of my life, and now they were planning to crash the most important day of it. Joshua and I sat down and discussed it that night. He suggested we hire security, and I agreed. We made sure the venue would have guest list verification at the front gate. Only names on the final list would be allowed in, no exceptions. Then I got a Facebook message. It was from Olivia, Lisa's daughter, my stepsister technically, though we were never close. Lisa always made sure she stayed out of my way when we were kids. We lived in the same house but moved like shadows past each other. Olivia wrote, "I think you should talk to my mom. She's been crying every night." I didn't respond right away. Olivia kept messaging, saying Lisa was in pain, that she wanted to talk, that maybe we could find some way to make peace before the wedding. I finally wrote back and told her no. I didn't owe Lisa anything. Olivia said Lisa wanted to give a speech at the wedding. That was the last straw. I blocked her. I hadn't blocked anyone before, but I wasn't going to let her push in on my boundaries. After that, I never heard from her again. My aunt got a call later that week from my father. He asked her to talk to me, said he was worried I was letting emotions get in the way of family. She told him I had made my choice and that I didn't want contact. He didn't take it well. The next day, I received an email from my father, 5 pages long. He wrote about how we used to be a family, how Lisa helped raise me, how I was throwing away history. He said I couldn't erase what we had just because I didn't like how it ended. Attached to the email were old photos, Lisa holding me as a child, helping me decorate a birthday cake, standing behind me in what looked like a Halloween costume contest. I didn't remember most of those moments. I definitely didn't remember smiling in any of them. I deleted the email without replying. I brought it up in therapy the same week. I didn't read the email word for word. I just summarized it and said it felt like someone trying to rewrite a past I didn't agree to. My therapist asked me what I wanted from this wedding. I said I wanted peace. Not performance. Not reconciliation. Just peace. A few days later, I went to a dress shop with my aunt and found the one. It wasn't flashy or expensive. It was simple white, with lace on the sleeves and a clean skirt that fell to the ground. I had brought a picture of my mother's wedding dress with me, one I found years ago, folded inside a photo album my aunt had kept. I showed it to the woman at the store and asked if she could help me find something close. She smiled and said, "We can do even better." That was the dress I chose. We sent the final guest list to the venue the same night. Joshua double-checked that everything was secure. The name screening was strict. Anyone not on the list wouldn't even be allowed past the parking lot. That same weekend, I got a message from one of my old high school friends. She told me she ran into Lisa at a pharmacy. Lisa had asked if she was going to my wedding. When she said no, Lisa apparently looked surprised and said, "I thought Clara would want us there." I didn't respond to that either. But I started a new entry in my journal that night. I wrote down everything that had happened from the moment I mailed the card. I stapled the text message to the back of the page. It reminded me that boundaries without enforcement are just suggestions. The dress is now hanging in the spare bedroom of my aunt's house, zipped in its bag. My aunt ordered a small bouquet of white wildflowers to go with it, the same ones my mother carried when she married my father. I chose them because I remember the picture. My mother looked like herself in that moment. Real, present. This time, I want to walk down the aisle with someone who knows the whole story, every part of it, and no one standing in the back trying to rewrite it. Last weekend, my cousin Ellie hosted a small backyard reunion. Nothing formal, just grilled food, plastic chairs, and folding tables set up under string lights. She texted me saying it was a chill gathering for our side of the family. I almost didn't go, but she had always been kind, and with the wedding getting close, I figured it would be nice to catch up with the people who actually showed up for me. I pulled up around 6 in the evening, parked 2 houses down since the driveway was already full. As I walked through the side gate, I could hear music playing, low enough not to bother neighbors, loud enough to mask awkward silences. The moment I stepped into the backyard, my eyes locked on the patio set near the fence. My father was sitting there with a drink in his hand, and beside him, Lisa. Ellie was already halfway to me, moving fast. She whispered, "They just showed up. Said they wanted to congratulate you." I didn't think they'd actually come. I nodded, but my feet felt stuck. Most of the guests were already seated and halfway through their plates. Walking out would have made things worse, so I kept moving toward the buffet table like nothing had happened. Lisa stood up when she saw me. Her eyes welled up and she smiled too wide. I didn't stop. I walked past her and went straight to my aunt, who had no idea they were there either. I gave her a hug, picked up a plate, and sat beside my cousin on the far side of the lawn. My father came over 5 minutes later and tried to hug me. I took a step back and told him I wasn't comfortable. A win. He looked caught off guard but didn't push it. Lisa lingered behind him, watching the exchange. She didn't sit down again for a while. During dinner, Lisa kept looking at me, not staring but glancing every few seconds like she was studying me. At one point, she leaned across the table and said, "You look so much like her now." I didn't answer. I turned to my cousin on the right and asked her about her new job. Lisa tried a few more times to make conversation. I kept redirecting. Eventually, she got the message. When the plates were cleared, I waited until people started moving toward dessert and games. Then I stood up and made my way to the side gate. I didn't even make it halfway before I heard footsteps behind me. Lisa was following me. She caught up to me at the driveway. Her makeup looked worn down, like she had already been crying before she even left her chair. She asked me to wait. I didn't respond, but I stopped walking. She started talking. Said she knew she made mistakes. Said she was young and scared and thought she had to be strong for everyone. She said she never let herself grieve because someone had to keep the house together. Then she said something about being compared to my mother, how hard it was living in a house filled with memories that weren't hers. I asked her if that's why she told a 10-year-old not to cry at her own mother's grave. She froze. Then she started crying harder. Said she had never meant to be cruel. Said she felt like she was trying to fill shoes that didn't belong to her. That no matter what she did, she could never be enough. I didn't say anything for a while, just listened. My father came out next. He didn't even look at me at first. He went straight to Lisa and told her to stop making a scene. She tried to wave him off, but he kept raising his voice. That's when I spoke. I told him Lisa had been making scenes since 2007. Neither of them followed me after that. I got in my car and drove off. No one from the party texted me after, not even Ellie. But my aunt called the next morning and said she had no idea they were coming. I told her I believed her. That night, I wrote everything down: the backyard, the food, the looks, the driveway. I didn't cry, but I shook. Not from sadness, it's from something else. Because for the first time, Lisa cried in front of me, and it wasn't about my mother. It wasn't about loss. It was about her fears, her regret, her image. And I realized something I had never seen clearly before. She was never mourning. She was competing. And now she's finally realizing she lost. A few days after the backyard ambush, I drove past the house I grew up in. I didn't plan to stop, but when I saw the for sale sign in the yard, I pulled over and parked across the street. It looked smaller than I remembered. The front garden was overgrown and the paint on the shutters was peeling, but the porch swing was still there. The same one my mom used to read on every Sunday. Later that night, I looked up the listing. The photos were recent, open kitchen shots, backyard angles, and one wide shot of the living room. I didn't see anything that looked familiar, but when I clicked on the virtual tour, something stopped me. In one of the bedrooms, probably the spare, there was a piano. Not just any piano. My mother's. The same one she used to play on quiet nights when she thought I was asleep. I had asked about it years ago. My father said Lisa got rid of it. I called my aunt the next day. She told me Lisa never liked giving things away. She kept most of my mother's belongings in storage, claiming they were valuable or sentimental even though she never spoke about my mother unless it was to complain. My aunt mentioned an old email thread she once had with my cousin Ellie where a storage unit was briefly brought up. I found the thread buried in my inbox under forwarded recipes and school pictures from years ago. I called the storage company that afternoon. The unit was still active and under my father's name. I drove out to the location the next day, signed in at the front desk, and told the clerk I was his daughter. He didn't ask for anything else. The unit smelled like dust and heat. Metal shelves lined the walls. Boxes stacked on top of one another. Some were labeled, others weren't. I started with the ones that had my mother's initials written in faded marker. Inside the first box, I found photo albums. Thick, heavy ones with plastic film over each page. Birthdays, beach trips, Christmas mornings. Every picture I thought had disappeared. Every moment Lisa erased from the walls of our home was sitting here in a box. The second box held her journals. There were at least 10 of them, some leather-bound, others spiral notebooks, each dated, filled to the edge of every page in her handwriting. I didn't open any of them right there. I just packed them carefully into a bag. Then I found her wedding dress. Not the one Lisa stuffed into a garbage bag years ago, but the real one. Wrapped in dry cleaning plastic, still cream-colored, with lace on the sleeves. Just like the one I'd had replicated. I placed it gently next to the journals. At the bottom of the third box was a single envelope. It was sealed. My name was written on it in my mother's handwriting. I didn't open it until I was back in my car, parked with the engine off. It was dated 6 weeks before she passed. The paper was soft, the ink slightly faded. She wrote about how much she loved me, how proud she was. She wrote about the life she hoped I'd have. She said she knew there would be people who tried to rewrite my story, but I would survive them. She said, "You won't need to scream to be heard. You just have to keep speaking." I drove to a print shop the next morning and scanned the letter. I printed 2 copies and framed the original. Then I packed up everything I'd collected and brought it to my aunt's house. My journals, the dress, the photo albums, and the piano keys I found tucked inside one of the boxes, in an envelope marked spare parts. That night, I sent the scanned letter to Lisa by email. No message, no subject line, just the attachment. A few hours later, a message came in from Olivia. I had blocked her on Facebook after she tried to push Lisa's speech idea, but she used a different number this time. The message read, "What did you send her? She's been sobbing in her room all day." I didn't answer. I closed my laptop, turned off my phone, and placed the framed letter on my nightstand. Not as a warning, not even as revenge, just as a reminder that there were pieces of my mother that no one could erase, not even the ones who tried the hardest. And now I had them back. Every photo, every word, every truth. 2 weeks before the wedding, Joshua's parents hosted the rehearsal dinner. They had rented a small vineyard just outside the city, private, quiet, with a long wooden table set under strings of warm lights. The guest list was tight, just the people who had stood by us. No coworkers, no extended family, no one who needed an explanation. We arrived an hour before sunset. Everything was already set up. Wine glasses lined the table. Mason jars filled with candles flickered along the railing. Joshua's mother had picked out a jazz playlist that played softly in the background. My aunt brought a scrapbook she'd made of my childhood photos, and one of Joshua's cousins had printed little thank you cards with our names on them. Halfway through the first course, one of the venue staff quietly approached Joshua and whispered something. He leaned toward me and said someone unexpected had shown up. Olivia. She wasn't on the list. I had blocked her weeks ago after she tried to argue Lisa's case, and there had been no contact since. I stepped away from the table and followed Joshua to the side path leading toward the parking area. Olivia was standing near the gate alone, wearing a dark green dress and holding a wrapped box. I didn't let her inside. We stood on the gravel under the last bit of daylight, and she said she just needed 5 minutes. I considered turning around, but Joshua stood a few feet away watching, so I stayed. Olivia told me Lisa hadn't been the same since receiving the letter. She said Lisa cried most nights and barely touched her food. She said Lisa had finally started therapy and kept playing the piano, the same one I saw in the listing photos. She said Lisa wanted to talk, just once, and that she wanted closure before the wedding. I asked her why Lisa never considered therapy back when she was telling a 10-year-old not to cry at her mother's grave. Olivia didn't answer that part. She just looked down and said Lisa thought if she ignored the pain, it would disappear. She told me Lisa felt like she was losing me forever now that I was getting married, that it was different now, that it felt real. I told Olivia I was never hers to lose, that she never had me. That being in the same house doesn't make someone a mother. I told her Lisa wasn't owed a conversation just because she finally felt something. Olivia said Lisa didn't expect forgiveness. She just wanted to be heard. I told her that was the problem. Lisa never listened, and now she wanted the last word. I said I wasn't interested in whether Lisa forgave herself. That wasn't my responsibility. My only job was to protect my peace. I asked her to leave. Joshua's father came over and gently escorted her out. He didn't raise his voice or make a scene. He just walked her back to her car and stood there until she drove off. When I returned to the table, most of the guests hadn't even noticed anything had happened. Dessert was being served. Someone had lit more candles. The air had cooled down just enough for jackets. Later that night, Joshua and I sat together near the vineyard's entrance while people mingled. He brought up Olivia. He said maybe Lisa could attend the wedding, not to speak, not to interact. just to sit in the back, quietly. He said it as a gesture, something symbolic, closure. I told him this wasn't about a sad woman missing a wedding. This was about 10 years of silence and gaslighting being rewritten into something convenient. I told him I wasn't looking for a final scene. I already had my ending. When we got home, I texted the venue manager and added a final layer of security. All guests would be screened again at the gate. IDs checked. Any name not matching the list would be turned away before they even reached the main road. No more surprises. No more appearances. No more requests for a second chance. That night, I sat on the bed with my wedding shoes in my lap and stared at the guest list. I didn't feel nervous. I felt aware. Like every moment from the last 16 years had brought me to this one. I thought about Lisa's face at the reunion, how her voice cracked, how her hands shook, how none of that happened when I needed it most. I remembered the sound of her voice at the cemetery, and now she wanted to be heard. But that's the thing, grief isn't just about loss. It's about who you show up for when it matters. Lisa missed her moment. I didn't. 3 days before the wedding, I received an email from the editor of a local lifestyle magazine. She introduced herself and explained the publication was running a series on women reclaiming their stories that had been reshaped or ignored by others. She said she had read about mine on a therapist-run blog months ago. One of my old counselors had published a piece on grief, and she'd shared parts of my journey anonymously, with my consent at the time. That was how the editor found me. At first, I ignored the email. I thought I was done telling this story. But the more I sat with it, the more I realized this wasn't just about Lisa anymore. It was about my mother, and how quickly she was erased from her own home. It was about how people get rewritten by those who survive them, and how silence gets mistaken for healing. I replied and said I would do it, but only anonymously. No names, no timeline, no photos. Just the events as they happened, through my voice. The editor agreed. We met in a quiet cafe on a Wednesday afternoon. I wore plain clothes, no makeup, hair tied back. The recorder sat between us, and I told the story the way it unfolded. From the cemetery, from the necklace, from the piano. I talked about the day Lisa told me not to cry. The day I found my mother's wedding dress in a garbage bag. The moment I saw her piano again in a virtual tour video. I didn't cry during the interview. My voice didn't shake. It felt like I was reading from a script someone else had written, but every line was real. 2 days later, the article went live on their website. The title read, "The Silence Around Stepmothers and Grief." It was short but powerful. Every paragraph captured what had been taken from me without permission. No names were used. No direct accusations, just facts, arranged in order, just truth. I didn't share it. I didn't send it to anyone. But things have a way of spreading. A woman who knew Lisa from a community art class recognized the story. She forwarded it to her. I found out the next morning when Olivia texted me from a different number. Again. She had been blocked after the rehearsal dinner incident, so this time it came from an unknown number with no name saved. The message said, "She hasn't spoken all day. She just keeps playing that piano. What did you do?" I didn't respond. That afternoon, I checked the article again. There were dozens of comments from strangers, people who had experienced something similar. Daughters, stepchildren, even stepmothers who had made mistakes and were trying to do better. None of them knew who I was, but they understood the story. My father sent me an email later that evening. No subject line, just one sentence, "Why are you doing this?" I didn't reply to him either. This wasn't about him. It wasn't about Lisa. It wasn't even about me. It was about my mother finally having her place in the story restored. The version of her that existed before Lisa started rewriting everything. That night, I drove to the cemetery. The gates were still open when I arrived. I walked up the gravel path with a paper bag in one hand and my mother's letter in the other. I sat down beside her headstone and read the letter again, this time out loud. She had written it 6 weeks before she died, knowing she wouldn't be there to say these things in person. Her handwriting curved like ribbon. She wrote about strength, about memory. It's about surviving without losing the parts of yourself that matter most. When I finished reading, I took out the printed article, folded it in half, tucked it under a bouquet of wildflowers I had picked up from a roadside stand. I placed them both carefully at the base of the stone, where no wind could carry them away. The moon was out by the time I stood up again. No one else was around. No ceremony. No music. No speeches. Just the sound of the wind moving through the trees. I walked back to my car with no plans to tell anyone what I had done. And back at home, the framed letter stayed where it had always been, next to my dress, next to my mother's necklace, next to the copy of the piano key I had taken from the storage unit. All of it in one place now. Quiet, but never erased.